Science shouldn't feel like a closed door. Welcome to Human Verified, your backstage pass to the world of high stakes research and the business of staying alive. My name is Gina Winchester, a Native American scientist, professor, author, and I've created this space where we swap dense academic jargon for fresh, no nonsense insights. Whether I'm deconstructing pharmaceutical breakthroughs, clinical trials, or the how this is legal side of STEM business, I'm here to bridge the gap between the lab bench and your daily life. It's rigorous research met with real world storytelling because understanding how science works is the ultimate power move. Spider Man's psyche is all of us. You'll be left in the dust unless it's stuck by ya. And a lean, silent figure slowly fades in the gathering darkness, aware at last that in this world, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Narrator Stan Lee. Amazing Fantasy number 15, August 1962. No matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to make things work out. Every time Spider Man wins a battle, Peter Parker loses. Peter Parker, The Amazing Spider Man number 18, November 1964. I can't let myself stop. If I stop moving, if I stop fighting, I'll start thinking. And if I start thinking, I'll go out of my mind. Peter Parker, The Amazing Spider Man number 33, February 1966. I'm living a double life, and every day it gets harder. I'm lying to Aunt May. I'm alienating my friends. I'm a hero to the city, but to the people who matter most to me, I'm a mystery or a disappointment. Peter Parker, The Amazing Spider Man number 50, Spider Man No More, July 1967. He's Spider Man, savior of the city, protector of the innocent, and the loneliest guy in town. Narrator Stan Lee, The Amazing Spider Man number 87, August 1970. Whether you are a dedicated comic book enthusiast or have simply paid attention to pop culture over the last 2 decades, you are undoubtedly familiar with Spider Man and his civilian identity, Peter Parker. Spidey stands as the premier comic book icon, frequently challenged for the top spot only by Batman. This sparks endless debates across social media platforms, where fans of all generations clash over whether Marvel's Wallcrawler or DC's Dark Knight deserves the title of the greatest superhero ever created. Financially speaking, however, Spider-Man stands unmatched, pulling in an astonishing $1 billion in worldwide retail sales. Since the introduction of the Spider-Man live-action films, along with video games and merchandise, more than $10 billion in revenue has come in. This surpasses the combined retail earnings of Batman, Superman, and the entire Avengers franchise. For those drawn to Peter Parker's journey, this undeniable global appeal makes perfect sense. He resonates so deeply due to his inherent vulnerability, relatable everyday struggles, and a strong ethical foundation. And he has grown over the years. In the beginning, Stan Lee wrote Peter Parker as a bit of an arrogant intellectual, though isolated, poor, and the everyman. He was an outcast because of his social awkwardness and was the token intellectual superior. He was so lovable, though, because of his loneliness and isolation inherent in his dual identity. Peter was just some regular kid from Queens, New York, and not some super rich genius like Tony Stark. Because of this, he had to work. He had to go to school. He had to build a life while at the same time web slinging across the city. He was always broke because he had to spend all of his money on his high-tech Spidey gear and had to make his own web fluid so he could swing from here to there. Being Spider-Man would ruin Peter's life again and again. This fed into his alienation. In many comic book arcs, his life would force him to abandon his friends, miss appointments, and break promises, which fed directly into his depression and guilt. And this is why Marvel fans aren't surprised the recent movie broke records. Tom Holland's Peter Parker in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is currently considered the people's favorite version of Peter Parker, though all three Peter Parkers in the live-action films are beloved. In Spider-Man Brand New Day, which is breaking box office records, Tom Holland delivers an emotional performance that has resonated with people of all ages all over the world. It mirrors many of the modern contemporary loneliness and digital isolation epidemics we see right now. But this movie also emphasizes the narrative that true resilience requires reaching out, rebuilding bonds, and accepting community support rather than enduring everything alone. Today, let's take a look at the emotional epidemic sweeping the world and why the story of Spider-Man's internal struggles resonates. We'll look at some psychological bases for why the story of Spider-Man hits so close to home and discuss how we all can break today's isolation struggle. With great power comes great responsibility. At its core, Peter Parker is about how saving the world costs you the people you love. In Spider-Man No Way Home, Peter Parker's isolation starts when his real identity gets wiped away, severing his connection to every warm memory and support system he ever built. To keep his loved ones safe, he pushes them away, turning his secret life into a wall between himself and normal human connection. Every mistaken loss rests entirely on his shoulders, turning his daily routine into a quiet, heavy grief. That isolation cuts deepest with Aunt May and Mary Jane. Protecting May means lying for years and sacrificing his own jobs and happiness, and losing her strips away his primary moral compass. Pushing MJ away hurts even worse because she truly gets him. The most painful moment of his life is watching the person he loves look at him with zero recognition, choosing to stay a ghost so she can live a safe life. Living by his creative power and responsibility means protecting the city while destroying his own private world. Sitting alone on rooftops above a city he protects but never truly belonged to. Over time, the mask becomes a refuge. And I can relate. Can you? Wearing the suit allows Spidey to be witty, confident, and celebrated. But back in his civilian clothes, he is struggling, grieving, and completely overlooked. Like in so many other versions of Spidey, the Spider-Man alter ego completely swallows up the very human Peter Parker. Yet, despite stacking loss upon loss, Tom Holland's Peter Parker never turns bitter or cruel. His true superpower isn't his Spidey powers. It's that no matter how isolated he becomes, he always chooses empathy over resentment. And that's why we love him so much. That is why Peter is so popular. We see ourselves in him and his struggles. We see our emotional development in his emotional development, and we can't stop talking about it. We've been blessed to see a few versions of Spider Man that have embodied the emotional growth that we see in Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Each of the three live action actors we've come to know and love has brought out a distinct side of Peter's emotional sacrifice. Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker carries a heavy, quiet weight rooted in guilt and daily hardship, driven by the tragic loss of Uncle Ben and the relentless stress of making ends meet. His life is a continuous struggle where doing the right thing means putting duty ahead of his own happiness. Andrew Garfield's version brings a sharper, more emotional edge shaped by deep feelings of abandonment. Starting as an outsider carrying the mystery of his missing parents, he uses sarcasm to shield his loneliness, grounding his entire world in his relationship with Gwen Stacy. When tragedy strikes, his grief becomes an open wound, leading him to lose himself entirely in his work as Spider Man just to cope with the heartbreak. We shouldn't be too surprised by this because Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland's Peter Parker are millennial and Gen Z stories. I'll touch on this important detail in a little bit. And it's not just Peter Parker. In 2018, Miles Morales' Spider Man captured the world. A Gen Z boy from Brooklyn, he was launched into the Spider Verse without his consent. He couldn't control his powers, and his awkwardness stemmed from the fact that he was a growing kid fumbling through his teenage years. Now he is New York's only Spider Man. He's stopping the bad guys, keeping his grades up, and balancing the legacy of the Spider Man he knew growing up. Underneath, he feels the crushing weight of trying to make his parents proud and the deep loneliness of being the only person in the world like him. Or so he thinks. When you stay stuck in your head and try to solve every problem yourself, your body eventually forces you to slow down. For Miles, bottling up his feelings and insisting I'm good leads to a terrifying physical crash and a full-blown panic attack. To move past the breaking point, Miles has to strip away his surface level reactions. On the outside, he mostly shows restlessness, frustration, and a frantic urge to leap into action. Beneath that anxious drive sits heartbreak, a terrifying fear of losing the people he loves, and a quiet sadness over losing out on a normal teenage life. His arc forces him to confront what happened and his fear that he might not be strong enough to save everyone. Not surprisingly, Miles grows not by being stronger, but by breaking his habit of trying to carry everything alone. Early on, like the Peter Parkers we've discussed so far, he believes isolation and sacrifice are his only options. His real breakthroughs happen when he drops the solitary hero routine and lets himself be vulnerable. Whether he is having an honest heart to heart with his dad or simply asking, hey, you got a minute? His biggest act of courage isn't punching a villain. It is taking off the emotional mask, slowing down long enough to feel the pain, and letting someone else in. Spider Man resonates with the world right now. I believe the evolution of every Spider Man over the years has brought millennials and Gen Z closer to themselves. This has only been reinforced by the success of D&D. This movie dives deep into what happens to a person when the entire world forgets who they are. It fits right into the legacy of Peter Parker and Miles Morales in that it communicates a psychological and emotional struggle as well as pointing to a path to growth. Like many millennials and Gen Z, The Peter Parker of the 1960s and Tom Holland's Spider-Man is celebrated by millions. Though Peter returns to a silent apartment, completely invisible to everyone he passes on the street. When he crosses paths with the Punisher, Frank Castle shuts down Peter's martyrdom, warning him that locking himself away isn't a noble mission. It's a self-imposed prison sentence that will hollow him until he becomes a ghost. Just like Miles, bottling up his grief and refusing to ask for help eventually breaks Peter Parker down physically, showing up as extreme fatigue and stress-induced mutations. The filmmakers intentionally crafted Peter's story to mirror the modern male loneliness epidemic. It shows how overwork and isolation tear you down from the inside out, while offering a quiet message of hope about the vital need for human connection. Pulling away from people resonates with all of us, and every generation uses different excuses to justify it. Millennials disguise their isolation as productivity or self care, burying themselves in endless work to avoid a quiet room, or framing canceled plans as protecting their peace. Burning out for years has made retreating behind a wall of responsible sounding mental health language feel necessary rather than lonely. Gen Z and Gen Alpha step back to avoid a world that feels unpredictable and harsh. Gen Z hides behind screens to protect themselves from real world rejection. They trade messy offline relationships for safer, low risk online spaces. Meanwhile, Gen Alpha grew up in pandemic lockdowns where staying indoors was the default. For them, playing video games alone in a bedroom isn't cutting off from the world, it's just where life happens. When stressed out, they often turn to predictable devices to soothe themselves rather than dealing with the friction of real human connection. I know you're scared of the unknown. You don't want to be alone. When you take away the exciting heroics of a Marvel movie, the core emotional story feels like a mirror held up to burnout. So seeing Peter sit alone in a quiet, cramped apartment after losing his safety net hits close to home. But each generation takes this message and reflects on the path to growth differently. Let's take a look at that generational impact. Millennials see Peter's nonstop hero routine for what it really is, an unhealthy habit of using productivity and hustle culture to stay too busy to feel. We tend to channel our pain straight into productivity, taking on extra freelance gigs and optimizing our schedules. Raised with a stronger language around mental health, though, millennials tend to view Peter's intense self reliance as a warning sign rather than something to admire. At the same time, many people confuse being constantly surrounded by others with actually being close to them. Millennials can maintain huge professional networks, active group chats, and busy social calendars, yet still feel deeply lonely because they lack friends with whom they can be genuinely vulnerable. When isolation and bitterness completely take over, it creates a dangerous mindset that mirrors a dark character like the Punisher. For millennials, years of burnout can curdle into a cynical, hyper independent attitude where they give up on the institutions, push people away, and view life strictly as a struggle where you can only rely on yourself. Just like Miles and Peter, holding all this emotional stress inside catches up with the physical body. Millennials feel long term suppression as physical ailments like chronic migraines, stomach issues, tension headaches, and exhaustion, where their bodies are essentially forcing a pause when their minds refuse to take one. Gen Z experiences Peter's isolation through the lens of modern social friction and digital fatigue. This connects deeply with the cruel irony of his life. Spider Man is celebrated by millions on screen, yet Peter Parker remains completely invisible in his day to day existence. For a generation raised online, feeling constantly connected yet physically isolated, Peter's habit of pulling away and keeping people at arm's length does not look like a failure. It feels like a natural survival tactic against an overwhelming world. But when Frank Castle calls him out on his self imposed martyrdom, it strikes a chord with young viewers who are growing tired of the classic lone wolf hero. They genuinely want to see people break out of their self imposed shells. Much like Peter bearing his grief in hero work, Gen Z often channels internal distress into relentless digital output, throwing themselves into personal branding, online activism, and strict habit tracking routines. They navigate a nonstop stream of group chats, social media comments, and digital servers that creates the illusion of constant community, leaving them surrounded by thousands of pixels without a single real world person to turn to during a crisis. This isolation is further amplified by online subcultures that glorify total apathy, peddling the idea that the world is broken and that opening up to anyone is pointless. Ultimately, this strain manifests as rapid nervous system overload, showing up as physical panic attacks, racing heart rates, and deep sensory burnout from a world that never lets them disconnect. Younger Gen Alpha viewers process Tom Holland's heavy emotional burden through action, physical cues, and visual storytelling. Growing up in a world where virtual spaces and online hangouts are second nature, Spidey's physical solitude does not shock them. Instead, they register his pain through the visible wear and tear on his body and suit. They see his exhaustion in his movements, tracking his mental strain through physical fatigue rather than quiet dialogue. Online, you'll see Gen Alpha treating his ability to push through immense pressure as a test of raw endurance, admiring his grit and seeing his emotional survival as the ultimate proof of strength. For this generation, coping strategies traditionally involve disappearing into video games, where aura farming, finding loot, daily login streaks, and solo leveling offer a predictable escape from unpredictable real world feelings. Hanging out takes place inside virtual game worlds where they spend hours playing alongside avatars. But those objective based spaces rarely teach them how to navigate face to face vulnerability or real life conflict. The real risk of growing up so immersed in extreme online content and ironic memes is that they become desensitized early on. Learning to mock genuine emotion or caring is cringe rather than offering empathy. Ultimately, this strain manifests physically through severe sleep disruption, screen related exhaustion, and intense agitation whenever they are disconnected from their devices. Emotional burden leaves a physical mark no matter your age. Across every generation, people face the exact same quiet struggle that Spider Man goes through. When life gets overwhelming, pulling back from the world feels like the safest, most logical thing to do. Retreating into a shell feels like self defense. But over time, confusing safety with isolation starves us of the real human connection we actually need to heal. Looking at how Peter handles grief, loneliness, and burnout gives us a remarkably clear lens for understanding how different age groups deal with their own mental health today. How we can all break the isolation epidemic. Breaking out of self imposed isolation starts with a fundamental shift in how you approach the world. Instead of playing defense, and constantly guarding against exhaustion or rejection, you have to actively reach out for human connection. When you stay isolated for too long, your brain gets jumpy, misinterpreting normal, safe social situations for dangerous threats. Rebuilding your social muscle works best in microdoses. So start small. Try making brief small talk with someone and give yourself explicit permission to leave social events after just 15 minutes. Or join a structured group activity like a run club or a board game night where a shared task naturally takes the pressure off. Building real friendships requires step by step vulnerability, which means trading generic scripts like I'm good for honest feelings. You have to match another person's openness without oversharing all at once. Above all, experts agree that you should be careful not to let the concept of protecting your peace become a convenient excuse to hide away forever. At the same time, you have to address the underlying emotional avoidance that drives your need to stay hidden in the first place. Pushing down pain by burying yourself in work, workouts, or endless chores keeps you functional on the surface. On the other hand, it triggers physical exhaustion, severe burnout, or sudden emotional crashouts. Real healing means stepping off the endless hamster wheel and learning how to sit with your feelings. When a frantic urge to stay busy hits, pause and ask yourself what emotion would surface if you put everything down right now. If the answer is sadness or anxiety, that task is acting as an emotional shield rather than real productivity. Practice daily stillness without screens or distractions, so those quiet, uncomfortable feelings have room to exist. When uncomfortable emotions arise, track the physical sensation in your body, like a heavy chest or a tight throat. Stay with it for 90 seconds to let your nervous system process the physical wave. Look past surface level irritability to identify primary emotions like deep grief or heartbreak. Actively challenge the toxic belief that your self worth is tied entirely to your output. In the end, you have to drop the lone savior mask of hyperindependence. Let trusted friends know when you just need them to listen. Take a deep breath and allow yourself to be seen. Because as Spider Man reminds us all, we are only human. Anyone can wear the mask. You could wear the mask. If you didn't know that before, I hope you do now. Thank you for spending this time with me today.